The history of crypto regulation around the world. Blockvault Daily. Imagine building something so powerful, so disruptive, that governments around the entire world didn't know whether to embrace it, ban it, or simply pretend it didn't exist. That is exactly what happened when Bitcoin arrived in 2009. And for the 15 years since, regulators from Washington to Beijing, from Brussels to Nairobi, have been scrambling to figure out what on earth to do with cryptocurrency. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the full history of crypto regulation around the world, where it started, how it evolved, and what the global landscape actually looks like right now. This is a story about power, money, fear, and the future of finance. To understand crypto regulation, you have to understand why it became necessary in the first place. Bitcoin was designed with a specific philosophy embedded into its very code: decentralization, permissionlessness, and freedom from institutional control. Satoshi Nakamoto's 2008 white paper was a direct response to the global financial crisis, a moment when public trust in banks and governments had collapsed. Bitcoin offered something radical: a monetary system with no central authority, no gatekeepers, no intermediaries. For early adopters, this was liberating. For regulators, it was terrifying. In those early years, between 2009 and 2012, most governments simply ignored cryptocurrency. The market cap was tiny, the user base was niche, and Bitcoin was largely associated with online communities, cypherpunks, and academic researchers. The US Treasury, the SEC, the European Central Bank, none of them had a formal position. Crypto existed in a legal gray zone, and that gray zone allowed it to grow rapidly and freely. Then came the first serious wake-up call: the Silk Road. Launched in 2011 by Ross Ulbricht, Silk Road was an anonymous online marketplace that used Bitcoin as its primary payment method to facilitate the sale of illegal drugs and other contraband. By the time the FBI shut it down in October 2013, it had processed over 9.5 million Bitcoin in transactions, worth billions at later valuations. Suddenly, Bitcoin wasn't just a tech curiosity. It was a tool for criminal activity, and governments could no longer look away. The US government moved first with meaningful enforcement action. In 2013, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, known as FinCEN, issued guidance stating that cryptocurrency exchanges and administrators qualified as money services businesses, requiring them to register and comply with anti-money laundering laws. This was the first formal regulatory acknowledgement that crypto was real, it mattered, and it needed oversight. It was also the beginning of a long, complicated relationship between the American government and digital assets. China took a very different approach. In December 2013, the People's Bank of China issued a notice prohibiting financial institutions from handling Bitcoin transactions, though individuals were still technically permitted to hold it. This began China's long history of tightening, loosening, and retightening its grip on cryptocurrency, a cycle that would repeat multiple times over the next decade. By 2017, China had banned initial coin offerings entirely, and by 2021, it issued its most sweeping crackdown yet, banning all cryptocurrency transactions and mining operations outright. The world's largest mining ecosystem was effectively dismantled overnight, causing Bitcoin's hash rate to drop by nearly 50% before miners relocated to Kazakhstan, the United States, and other countries. Meanwhile, Japan took a fascinatingly progressive stance. After the catastrophic collapse of Mt. Gox in 2014, once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, which lost approximately 850,000 Bitcoin belonging to customers, Japan didn't recoil from crypto. Instead, it regulated it. In 2017, Japan officially recognized Bitcoin as legal tender under the Payment Services Act, requiring exchanges to register with the Financial Services Agency. Japan became one of the first nations to create a comprehensive legal framework for crypto, and while that framework had its own growing pains, it established a model that other nations would later attempt to replicate. The European Union, characteristically deliberate in its policymaking, spent years developing its approach. Early EU member states diverged significantly. Germany classified Bitcoin as a financial instrument as early as 2013, while other nations remained ambiguous. The real turning point came with the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation, better known as MiCA, which the European Parliament passed in April 2023. MiCA created a unified regulatory framework across all 27 EU member states, covering everything from stablecoin issuance to exchange licensing requirements. It was the most comprehensive crypto regulatory package ever enacted, and it sent a clear signal: Europe intended to lead on crypto governance. Back in the United States, the regulatory story became increasingly complex and, frankly, contentious. The Securities and Exchange Commission under Chairman Gary Gensler adopted an aggressive enforcement-first philosophy, arguing that most cryptocurrencies beyond Bitcoin qualified as unregistered securities under the Howey test, a legal standard dating back to a 1946 Supreme Court case involving Florida orange groves. The SEC sued Ripple Labs in December 2020 over XRP, a case that dragged on for years and fundamentally shaped how the industry understood securities law in the digital age. In July 2023, a federal judge delivered a landmark partial ruling, finding that XRP sold on public exchanges did not constitute a security, while institutional sales did. The nuance mattered enormously. The SEC also pursued action against major exchanges including Coinbase and Binance in 2023, alleging they operated as unregistered securities exchanges. These cases highlighted a core tension in American regulatory philosophy. The SEC believed existing laws were sufficient to govern crypto, while the industry argued desperately that new, purpose-built legislation was essential. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission staked its own territorial claim, asserting jurisdiction over Bitcoin and Ethereum as commodities. This jurisdictional overlap between two powerful agencies created regulatory confusion that cost American crypto businesses billions in legal fees and drove significant innovation offshore. Elsewhere in the world, the regulatory map looked widely varied. El Salvador made global headlines in September 2021 when President Nayib Bukele signed legislation making Bitcoin legal tender, the first country in history to do so. Citizens could use Bitcoin to pay taxes, settle debts, and purchase goods. The government even launched a digital wallet called Chivo and distributed $30 in Bitcoin to every citizen who signed up. The International Monetary Fund pushed back strongly, urging El Salvador to reverse course, raising concerns about financial stability and money laundering risks. El Salvador refused, and Bitcoin became a matter of national identity. India's relationship with crypto has been turbulent. In 2018, the Reserve Bank of India banned banks from providing services to crypto businesses, a move that was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2020 as unconstitutional. Rather than creating clear enabling legislation, India instead introduced a punishing 30% tax on crypto gains and a 1% tax deducted at source on transactions. The result was a dramatic decline in trading volumes on Indian exchanges as users migrated to international platforms. India demonstrated how tax policy could function as de facto regulation, without ever passing comprehensive crypto law. The United Arab Emirates and specifically Dubai emerged as perhaps the world's most crypto-friendly jurisdiction during this period. The Dubai Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority was established in March 2022, and the Emirate aggressively courted crypto businesses with clear licensing pathways, favorable tax treatment, and a government that openly celebrated blockchain innovation. Binance, Crypto.com, and dozens of major firms established regional headquarters in Dubai. The UAE understood that regulatory clarity was itself a competitive advantage in attracting global capital and talent. Nigeria told a completely different story. Home to one of the world's highest rates of peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading, Nigeria's central bank banned crypto transactions through regulated financial institutions in 2021. Yet Nigerians continued trading through peer-to-peer platforms at extraordinary volumes, demonstrating the demand driven by currency instability, inflation, and limited banking access simply could not be regulated away. Eventually, in December 2023, Nigeria Securities and Exchange Commission published a new framework, signaling a shift toward regulated engagement rather than prohibition. What does all of this history tell us? Several important patterns emerge. First, regulatory approaches are almost always reactive rather than proactive. Governments respond to crises, scandals, or political pressure rather than thoughtfully anticipating innovation. The collapses of Mt.